Um, things are a little surreal. I will not lie to you. However, again, I remain firm in the idea that we will get through this. Um, now, obviously, I'm just getting a cannot reached from your channel. Huh, that's weird. Hello, just saw the campus notification. It seems that the live stream cannot be reached from your channel. Yeah, weird. It should send an announcement to all of you who click the subscribe that, hey, I'm live. But I don't know why it's not doing that. And it's streaming no kilobytes. Great. Great. No data. What happened? Come on, don't do this to me right now. Alright. Okay. Should be back online. Allegedly. Hopefully. Okay. No. Okay. I think I'm back. Yes. Alright. Sorry about that. The internet. Okay. Better? Yes or no? Let me know in the chat. I love how the way to do this is using a hotspot on my phone, which is surprisingly better than the Wi-Fi. I don't know why it's doing this, it's being a pain, but yeah. I haven't started yet. Don't worry. We're trying to hammer out all the hiccups here, trying to make sure everything can hear me. Everyone can hear me. Everyone can see me. Let me know if this is working better or not, and I'll get started with it. Also, let me know if you need the little face thing bigger or smaller. If you can't see the slide, I'll change it as needed. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing better. I'm glad that you guys can hear me and see me better based on what the live chat is saying, which is great. So here's the situation. This is what our lectures are going to be like for the foreseeable future. I don't know whether this is going to be because the school remains closed or because we'll have bigger fish to fry. Here's what I do know. What I do know is the structure of the class that I've set up after our discussion last time should be flexible enough to allow us to, if we can go back to school, just go back and we're all on the same schedule. So that should be all right. As I mentioned before, if you hear some loud banging in this house, my neighbors upstairs decided that they hate me, and so they got their 3-year-old bongo drums. So, perfect gift for a child in the middle of a quarantine, right? Great. Anyway, I've been listening to it all day. If you hear it, it's loud. I apologize. I can't really do much about it. It is what it is. So, here's what I would tell you regarding assignments. So we have a little bit of snafu today with the written assignment. I'm not gonna get salty again about it and tell you about the book, but here's what I will say. I think it's pretty clear that the assignment was designed in a way to be as easy as possible. Like I'm not trying to this. The Storm of Steel reaction paper. In fact, all the reaction papers are my softball assignments. Right? They should not have been giving people this much trouble. Now, does that mean that a lot of you guys still didn't submit it? Yeah, a lot. A lot of people said they needed extensions, suddenly found out they didn't need extensions anymore. What a coincidence. So, I'm not going to harp on it again. But what I will say is that this last minute extension, just to get all of whoever had it done but could not submit for some reason, to get it submitted, that's a one-time thing. Going forward, each reaction paper is going to be due the day of lecture at noon. That's it. That's when it's happening. I'm not changing it again. We're not going through this again. So that's it. In other news, you may have noticed, I know some of you even started the discussion sections. While I appreciate you guys taking some initiative on that, I would really rather you guys listen to the lecture first. You don't have to, but as a rule of thumb, those work a whole lot better after listening to the lecture, having done the discussion in class face-to-face like this. Well, in class, you know what I mean. And then you go to the discussion sections. Because those are like adding to the lecture, not they're not replacing the lecture. We're talking about different things in the lecture, so they're all supposed to combine to go over all the things we need to go over. One final thing, I was able to get through the school. I know a lot of you with other classes have probably been doing this through Zoom.com. Be able to get free access to the video conferencing tools. I don't really see myself using that because I'm combining 3 lectures into one, and that would just lead to too many students to do through Zoom. We're talking like 60 students in total. This is just easier for the lectures. However, not obligatory. If you want, we can do Zoom conferences for the movies if there's interest. So for Max and for Jojo Rabbit, if you guys want to do discussion sections, a little more intimate. I'm not expecting all of you guys to show up. A little more a little more like more like an office hour setting than anything. That's definitely something that we could probably figure out. Depends on how the movies are liked. Erica wants to know when the next reaction paper will be due. April 6th. So you have about a couple weeks to get Darkness at Noon done. I should have Darkness at Noon here somewhere. I'll find it. Anyway, April 6th. Again, 2 pages. Darkness at Noon, perhaps even more so than Storm of Steel, is a book that when you finish, you will have thoughts. Many, many, many thoughts. The book or piece of media that it most closely resembles is 1984, except it's not fictional. It's a real story. So, if you're into that sort of type of book or movie, like Darkness at Noon will be right up your alley. In terms of other stuff, I'm aware that many of you are stuck at home. Yes, the last one is due on 4/20. Get your jokes in now while you can, because we will not address this. But here's what I will say on movies. Because you guys are kind of stuck at home, we could figure out some extra credit assignments with movie watching. I know based on the results from Quiz 2, quite a few of you need extra credit. You know who you are. I'm going to make a playlist or like a list of movies that could work, and you have suggestions of anything that's topical based on what we're going to be talking about, please let me know so we can I'll add it to the list. And I believe there's a Chrome extension called Netflix Watch Party or something like that, where we can watch it together and then we can do a Zoom discussion on it. Again, those would not go on YouTube. I know for a couple of you, putting your faces on YouTube is not something you want to do, so I'm going to respect your privacy, and those will just be for us to discuss things. Now, let's talk Turkey. Let's get into the lecture. I don't believe I have anything else to talk about. This is new to me. If you have concerns, if you have an issue, if you have How can I put it? If there's something you want to see happen in the class that, for whatever reason, something in the class is not working for you, now is the time to tell me. Because, well, last week was the time for tell me, but you're still in time. Let me know ASAP so that we can change things before we get too into the swing of things. I know a couple of you have contacted me with issues surrounding internet at home. I'm not quite sure how to help you there. I think if you're going into this quarantine without access to the internet, I feel like my class is the least of your concerns. I worry about staying sane in that scenario, unless you got really good roommates, in which case God bless. But if there were ever a time to splurge on a data plan, maybe now is it. Other than that, if no one has any other questions, shoot them in the chat if you do. I guess we'll get started. I know a couple of you are seeing buffering. Unless I hardwire into my router, which I can't do because it's the other side of the house. Yeah, this is going to be the best we can do for now. I know I'm on Optimum Wi-Fi in this area, so I can try doing that for next time. No guarantees. We might do a test stream like on a Wednesday or something, see if that works any better, and try to hash this out. As of right now, I feel like this is just the easiest thing to do. So, let's get started. Because if you remember, way back when, ages ago, decades ago, we left the lecture off talking about... Oh, come on. Don't do this to me right now. All right, view, navigator. Extra credit appreciated with Dark Knight Rises work as a film. Nice try. No. I know we talked about it in class, but that's definitely not a historical movie. So, good effort. No. Denied. Dikembe Mutombo, that shit. No. Let's talk about our old friend Lenin. Let's recap this model of imperialism, because if you remember, this segued rather nicely into our discussion of World War I, which we're going to talk about today. We talked about imperialism as a politically motivated economic phenomenon, in that there are... I'm sorry. That is economic? I meant the opposite. Economically motivated political phenomenon. My bad. In which what you ended up seeing was, towards the latter half of the 1800s, all the European countries rapidly expanding into what we would now call the developing world. Places like Africa and Asia and South America. And we couldn't really understand why. There was no clear reason for it until Lenin comes along. And what Lenin notes, and what Lenin decides, looking at the world as it is that by the time he's writing this, in the early part of the 1900s, 98% of the world has been in some way colonized by Western powers. And we looked at stories coming out of the Congo and China and India and Japan. But the why of it, according to Lenin, boils down to two things. I know a lot of you guys are saying it's pausing a lot. This is the best I can do for the time being. As I mentioned, we are currently streaming off of this hotspot. There's really nothing else I can do here to make this any better. I have the quality down to the bare minimum here. Stream settings. I have it low latency. Enable DVR. No, that's what makes it go online. When this finished, will you be able to rewatch it? Yes. One of the few benefits of doing YouTube Live is that when this is done, it will go onto the YouTube channel automatically, and so anyone will be able to rewatch these lectures live, no issue at all. That's by design, both because not everyone's going to be able to watch it live, number one, and number two, because when you're going to write your final, I'll get to your question in a second. Having access to all these videos will be really, really helpful. So are you going to do a video something about the final, about how you want it typed or formatted in a certain way? Yes, you are right. I think that's actually a really good use of the free Zoom video conferencing tools that we got through the college. And we'll do that as a, whoever wants it can come and do a very boring lecture with me about how Microsoft Word works and like how the formatting works and stuff like that, how to use Word's bibliography to help you. Would Hacksaw Ridge be a good extra credit movie? I actually haven't watched that yet. Guys, if you guys want to do me a favor, if you want to email me all of these things, because I will forget, email me, use those just watch links I used for Max and for Jojo Rabbit to see like where it's available, like Hulu or Netflix and stuff like that, Prime. If you guys can save yourself money, great. If you can't, it is what it is. But we will definitely figure something out. I mean, I am a movie junkie, so I will happily watch movies with you guys and happily discuss them with you. So even though it's not a film class, it could be. Anyway, the Lemon model for imperialism, as we said, boils down to two things. We said, my mouse will collaborate here, resources and markets. Resources and markets. That's your elevator speech on Lenin. For Lenin, it's about the acquiring of raw resources. If you remember the pricing model, the bag of Doritos salsa verde with all of the things that make it up. You have your overhead, your labor, your profit. That's where the price comes from, right? You remember this. We said that in the early part of the Industrial Revolution, when overhead costs were kind of fixed for a wide variety of reasons, industrial producers started attacking labor costs. That's where the mechanization starts coming in order to really push down labor costs as much as possible. And this is also the thing that Marx takes issue with in the 1848 manifesto. At its core sum, that's sort of what Marx takes issue with. But in the latter half of the 1800s, what you end up seeing is people begin to really start tackling the overhead. It's the birth of a phenomenon we now call globalization, if you sort of think about it, where these industrial producers start going overseas looking for the cheapest source of, pardon the pun here, resources. Looking to find where, we called it vertical integration on a country's level, where producers are buying their supply chain. If I make Doritos, it's really useful for me to own the corn farm. If I make tires, if I own a plantation of rubber trees, that's really helpful for me because I can get things dirt cheap. If I make cheese, opening a creamery would be helpful, right? So when we talk about this sort of thing, this is what we mean when Lenin says countries go abroad to search for resources. They're going abroad to search for things like rubber and iron. No, because I don't take I see your question here, Dreamy. No, because I don't take attendance in my class. You know this. Attendance is absolutely not mandatory for these. You know this. If you watch, you watch. It's better for you. Anyway, as we said, it's about the search for resources. And we talked a lot, for example, Belgian Congo, right? Belgium produces tires for, at the time, bicycles. And then the early car, they needed rubber for make these tires, and so they ended up taking over the Congo and turned it into an open-air rubber factory. But that's reductive interpretation of imperialism. Like if you think imperialism is only about rich white European guys going all over the world looking for resources, you're only getting half of the picture. Because yes, it's about driving costs down. But if you remember what we talked about when we talked about the Industrial Revolution, we talked about crises of capitalism. We said that crises in industrial capitalism and in modern capitalism are crises of abundance. I can't sell my stuff. And if I can't sell my stuff, my economy will collapse. And so it is, yes, the search for raw materials, but it is equally the search for markets. It's the search for people to purchase the things that I am producing. Let me know if that makes sense, because we're going to move on. As we said, however, Lenin points out something rather important. And that is that at the end of his model, he says, look, if 98% of the world has been in some way, shape, or form being colonized, right? And countries will need to constantly expand to find more resources, more markets, otherwise their entire economies will collapse in on themselves. What will end up happening is, eventually, because land is a finite resource, there's only a certain amount of it available to countries to expand into. That means that war is inevitable in the Lenin model. Now, if Lenin says, well, this is the war that's going to end capitalism, it's going to, it's going to bring about the communist utopia. Obviously, that did not happen. But, as I mentioned in our last class way back when, and we're going to talk about this again on Thursday, this idea explains a lot of what Lenin does in World War I, right? Because if you just a couple years earlier had written a book, don't touch your face, Mark, coronavirus, bad, don't do what I do. If you wrote the book about how imperialism is going to cause capitalism to destroy itself and it's going to lead to a global war between all of these powers, and then the global war comes, you have your holy crap moment, it's time to start the revolution. More on that in a minute. But here's what Lenin cannot explain. Here is the thing that Lenin's model cannot understand, does not account for, does not at all take into consideration. And that is, if World War I starts and is purely about these economic principles, the economic survival of each and every country, why are people so happy about it? Why are people ecstatic when the war starts? You may have heard of this before, that when the war starts, all of these people go into the streets and start cheering that the war has started. Let me give you an example. This here is a picture of Paris, the day the war is declared. Here's a picture of, I believe this is Austria. This is Vienna. Here's Berlin. Here's London. These are people lining up to volunteer to fight in World War I. Yes, you can use the bathroom, Dritten. Go for it. Anyway, Lenin can't explain this. There at no point in Lenin's model is there a discussion of why would people support the war in the way that they do, right? He can't explain this at all. He cannot understand. His model does not account for why individuals, common people, you or me, why we would support the war. And for today, you guys had to read a document by Perry, Berrigan, Krukonis. And this is a primary source. This is a great source for your papers if you decide to use it. And what it is these are all journalists, the day the war is declared, talking about the reaction where they are. So Dorgelé is in Paris, Zweig is in Vienna, Schneiderman is in Berlin. Russell is in London. And they're all talking about the excitement. War is here. Great. Lenin can't explain that. So let's look through. There's a bit of a typo here that I'm just realizing, but I can change that. There you go. No problem. We change things on the fly here. Hey, anyway, here's what Dorgelès, out of all of them, we're going to look at Dorgelès first. What Dorgelès is talking about in Paris is the following. I'm just going to read this. He goes through a long description of the excitement of the parade. But then he asks himself a rather important question, which is, what did they have to defend, these black-nailed patriots? They didn't have a shack or an acre to till or hardly a patch of ground reserved for them at the cemetery. And yet they would depart like their rivals of yesterday, a heroic song on their lips and a flower in their guns. No more poor or rich, proletarians or bourgeois, right-wingers or militant leftists. There were only Frenchmen. And that last line sort of hammers home the reason for this. There was, I guess the closest thing we could call it is revolutionary fatigue from the century before. Landon asks, what he was saying is that too much resources with not too many people to buy them leads to a bad economy, right? You're missing a step. It's not so much that too many resources and not enough consumers leads to the bad economy. It's that you acquire resources to make into things, but then if you can't sell those things, your business goes under. So for example, think back to when we talked about the 2007 housing crisis, right? We had produced all of these homes, but everyone who wanted a home, who could afford a home, had a home. And so the bubble burst. And because you had people that had borrowed money, and had, it's called, the technical term is over-leveraging, if you're business-minded and you want to look into this more. But it's more of a, we don't have enough consumers to buy our stuff. And so what Lenin is talking about, not to go on a tangent, is these countries are, they're going abroad to search for resources. But that's not the only reason why they're going abroad. Because if they were, it would resemble more colonialism. It would resemble a sort of strategically located place where I can maximize my profit. It doesn't explain why, for example, Italy, that's late to the party, expands into Libya and Somalia, places that are famous for being deserts. It's not about the resources necessarily. It's about resources, yes, but it's also about markets. Anyway, moving back here. Yes, Dreamy has it right. I don't know what your actual name is, so write it in the comments so I don't keep calling you Dreamy. It's not the first nickname we have in the class, but still. Anyway, this argument of there were no poor or rich that day, or proletarians or bourgeois that day, or right-wingers or leftists that day. We were only Frenchmen that day, is a sense of what I was just calling this revolutionary fatigue. Because all through Unit 2, we have talked about revolution after revolution after revolution. England, America, France, 1848, the Industrial Revolution, change after change after change after change after change. The rise of Marxism, the rise of radicalism, the rise of socialism as a political movement. All of these things are happening. But nationalism sort of puts those in the back burner. And in that moment, all of those things that we had talked about, those real problems in society that we have spent 2 units talked about, that one day did not matter. And that's important. Because nationalism is key, and nationalism is the thing that Lenin ignores in his model. That's why his model is good, and it's a good first step, and it explains imperialism very well. But I also did not say it explains World War I very well. Because yes, it's a part of it, but it's not the only reason. Let's start with how exactly the war starts play by play. This will escalate rather quickly. So rather famously, World War I, most historians would agree with, starts when Gavrilo Princip, a nationalist, a Bosnian nationalist, shoots the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, the son of the ruler. This should make World War I rather prescient, because World War I starts with an act of terrorism, political terrorism. That's what this is. I just want to post something in the chat real quick. Just bear in mind, the stream is a few minutes behind. Your questions will be answered. Don't worry. Okay. So here's the timeline. At the time, Austria-Hungary is this large empire in Central Europe, has a bunch of like smaller states that are a part of the empire, kind of, but not really. One of those is Serbia. Serbia is aligned but not officially part of Austria. And within the country of Serbia is the smaller country of Bosnia. If you know anything about the story of the Balkans, you will know that the Serbs and the Bosnians have never liked each other very much. I believe there was a genocide there in the 90s, but take my 20th century history to learn more about that. Point being, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand shows up in Sarajevo, which is the historical capital of Bosnia, which is part of Serbia, which is also part of Austria. It's like a circle within a circle within a circle. We're countryceptioning here. What ends up happening is, in order to make a statement, to make a splash, Princip shoots the Archduke, shoots him dead, and this leads to a larger conflict, because in retaliation for what this has done, the country of Austria, the father of the dead prince, sends an ultimatum to Serbia, the country within which Bosnia is contained, and says, you are going to pay us. An ultimatum is essentially pay us or else. And it's an intentionally high number, because Austria knows that Serbia is not going to be able to pay it. They don't have that kind of money. But the point is not to get the money, the point is to go to war. All right? So they say, pay it or I will go to war with you. When Serbia doesn't have the money, Austria wants to go to war. However, right during this period, Russia declares that if Austria goes to war with Serbia, it will go to war with Austria. So let me paint you a picture here. Austria declares war on Serbia. Russia, in retaliation for Austria declaring war on Serbia, declares war on Austria. But Germany, who is allied with Austria, declares war on Russia. And then, for good measure, declares war on France because, France. And in order to do so, goes around the mountains through Belgium and destroys Belgium. And this annoys the British because the British and the Belgians are pals. And so England gets involved too. World War I is a mess. And to many observers, even though they're happy that the war has been declared for many, many reasons, no one can really articulate why the war is being fought. And that World War I starts off not so much as a war, at least not at first, in like the first couple of months. It starts off as a performance of war. So, for example, here you see a cavalry unit in World War I, from World War I. Here's the problem. We live in an era of World War I where tanks exist. So why are you going around on horses? This is ridiculous. Again, this is not about the war. It's about a performance of war. It's about expressing nationalism violently, that kind of nationalism that we talked about with Napoleon, violently through the exercise of war. But here's what ends up happening. What happens when armies fighting war in the old fashion, in the old manner of war, face down things like tanks and landmines and machine guns and planes? World War I is... in this class I said that there are a couple of dividing lines in this class. That there's definitely a world before and a world after these dividing lines. And one of those lines we said was 1648. A Treaty of Westphalia. There is very clearly a Europe before and a Europe after. It's why it's an end of union. World War I is another such dividing line. Because in World War I, the classical sort of feel-good version of history that we've been talking about hits a wall. It hits the modern world. But the problem is that this war, World War I, the first truly modern war, did not have the rules that we now have around modern war. So, for example, we understand nowadays that things like torture, bad, chemical weapons, don't use them. Indiscriminate use of landmines that might kill civilians, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Maybe there's a line that we do when we fight each other that we don't cross. But those rules come later and arguably come as a result of World War I. So this is a war with no rules, with no real thing to stop countries from doing the awful thing. I want to pause this for a minute because the question is, why did Princip shoot Franz Ferdinand? Good question. We're not quite sure. The prevailing theory is that he wanted to make a splash. That he wanted to, this is not a political science class. For more, I have a whole class on terrorism. You could actually go watch that. It's on the channel if I'm not mistaken. But one of the key drivers for acts of terrorism is notoriety. Everyone's going to know about the sufferings of the Bosnians because we have made this splash on the international scale, and people will know how we're suffering. That's the mentality. Oftentimes, it ends up not being the case, but this is the reasoning. This is the understanding of it. So let's go back to performance of war, because what happens when these classically trained, cavalry officers, but not only, regular infantrymen too, come face to face with an unvarnished reality of war? Well, the first people charging into the battle, people who were determined, who thought they'd be home by Christmas, they are shot down immediately. The old officers, the noble officers, members of the nobility, all of those holdovers of the nobility that had kept their position and their prestige because of their family names. Nobility in Europe ends rather violently in World War I. And it ends rather violently because these people are shot to ribbons. And when it becomes clear that the technological advantages are just not there on either side, because we have guns, they have guns, it soon becomes apparent that you're not going to win this war just by charging into battle. And so what they decide to do is, let's say you're a soldier. Let's say, who haven't I picked on? Let me pick on Landon here, because he's in the chat. It's the first name I saw. All right, Landon. Say hi to everyone. Congratulations, you're a soldier. Like many soldiers your age, you lied to get in. You said you were 18. You're actually 16. This is pretty common, and recruiting officers that are paid by how many recruits they get, don't really care and look the other way. You're sold the war on it's going to be glorious, it's going to be fantastic, you're going to learn so much. It's going to be like camp. It's going to be like a scout camp with weapons and guns. It'll be great. We'll be home by Christmas. That's how the war is sold. After all, we're Germans, we're French, we're Brits. We don't lose wars. That's not our thing. We're the best. The first couple of charges, many of them including your friends, end rather violently. And so going forward, your new commanding officers, your younger commanding officers, your smarter commanding officers, hand you a shovel. And they say, start digging. World War I very quickly evolves from a series of brutally violent charges into a stalemate of trench warfare. You're going to be digging a hole. No, Germany does not steamroll Western Europe. That's World War II. In World War I, that does not happen. In World War I, instead, you get this stalemate where trenches are dug, and if you are in this trench, you will spend the next 4 years of your life in this hole. And this is a hole that you're going to live in, eat in, shit in, and die in. Not always in that order. And the reality is that for many soldiers, they were digging their own graves, quite literally. Because if the two sides could not attack each other directly, they would just settle for taking pot shots at each other. And so, this is a rather deep trench. Not all of them are this deep. Some of them are actually rather shallow. And what ends up happening is that you're living your life crouched down. Because if you stand up, sniper hits you, bang, you're dead. There's also artillery. Artillery being fired. This is not Napoleon's itty-bitty cannons. We're talking like the big howitzers. And if a howitzer hits the trench in the wrong way, the whole thing caves in and buries you alive. And if you're lucky, you can dig yourself out. And the last danger is gas. Early on in the war, chemical weapons are used for the first time. These are chemicals that were known to be toxic because they had industrial chemical uses during the Industrial Revolution. But soon enough, someone realized that mustard gas was heavier than air. And because mustard gas, this highly toxic chemical, is heavier than air, if you drop it from a plane, it's going to fall into the lowest point on the battlefield. Only the lowest point on the battlefield happens to be the trench that you're in. And so, before the gas masks make their way to the soldiers, a lot of soldiers die. A lot of soldiers just don't make it. The soldiers that leave World War I leave the war profoundly changed by their experience. And they leave the war profoundly changed by their experience because they leave it profoundly cynical. They leave it profoundly disgusted with the lie. Because that's really what it is, right? World War I is essentially predicated on a lie. It's predicated on this idea that the war will be glorious, the war will be quick, the war will be easy. And it turns out that it is none of those things. World War I is the closest thing humans have come to making hell on earth because of the guns and the mud and the artillery. And we sent a bunch of kids there. I don't think that it is a coincidence that when these soldiers come home, they come home and create some of the most toxic, angry political systems known to man. More on that in a minute. But, for example, oftentimes you would still be forced by your commanding officer, because of the needs of the war, to charge, to take the other person's trench, like capture the flag almost. And the space between the trenches, very famously, is called no man's land. Not because there's no man there, but because no man can survive there. Being shot in no man's land is a death sentence. Now, sometimes the armies get along and allow medics to go back and forth to, stop the shooting, send the medics, get your wounded, take them back, start over. More often than not, however, this was not the case. And because there was no availability to go get the wounded and the dead, no man's land is a land of mud, of bullet casings, shell casings, craters from bombs, and the corpses of your fellow soldiers, which in the summer French heat begin to decompose rather rapidly, and so it smells. And again, there are no rules to this war. What I mean here is the biggest killer in World War I is not a gun, it's not a tank, although these things kill a lot of people in World War I. It's barbed wire. It's barbed wire because this stuff is set up in the middle of no man's land intentionally as like traps, like Kevin McAllister's most metal iteration of Home Alone, designed to trick people and to trip people and kill them without having to lift a finger. Because bear in mind, this is not like the itty bitty barbed wire you see in chicken wire. This is the barbed wire that if you fall into, will take chunks of you with it. Landmines are in no man's land. This place is hell. And when you're forced to charge in, you will lose a lot of your friends, a lot of your fellow soldiers. This is what I mean to say that the world after World War I is so much darker, because it's the first also mass war, massively industrialized war. Well, I am going to block this guy, because I don't think you're part of our class, and also not relevant. Remove. Anyway, alright, I am going to block this guy, put user on timeout, and remove. Anyway, yeah, this has been a thing in a lot of YouTube live streams. You got a bunch of bots just like spamming stuff. Fortunately, this was one of the yeah. Anyway, could be worse. Could have been one of the sex chat bots, which are a thing. I've been watching a couple of live streams on YouTube, and it's really bad. Anyway, point being, when we talk about World War I, one of the things that we need to also bear in mind is that it's tremendously destructive to the people that fight it on both sides. And what I mean to say is here, in World War II, the Allied soldiers had a very clear mission, a very clear understanding of this is why I'm here, right? I'm here because Hitler is a bad dude and we need to get rid of him. That doesn't exist in World War I. In World War I, you're fighting, you don't know why. You're told that the war would be great. It turns out not to be so great. You're promised glory, and instead you get stuck in a trench surrounded by mud and your own feces, surrounded by the rotting corpses of your friends, a couple feet away in no man's land. You're hungry, you're wet, you're miserable. World War I is hell. And this is what the big takeaway should be here. Come on. Another thing to bear in mind here, another thing to mention, that World War I is also the first major conflict between roughly equal powers after the Industrial Revolution. right? Because you have wars during imperialism, but I mean, with the exception of the Zulu and the Ethiopians, not a lot of people in the developing world had an easy time of protecting their countries from European powers because the technology gap was there as a result of the Industrial Revolution. One of the things that we talked about, for example, when we talked about the Civil War, is that the Confederacy could win all of the battles in the world, but the Union had more manpower and more industrial capability, so they could just keep pumping out more and better equipped soldiers time after time after time after time after time. But now imagine both sides have that, right? You can shoot a Frenchman and there's another Frenchman. You can shoot a German and there's two more Germans, right? And they're also equally as equipped and better as equipped. The very thing that makes the industrial economy so productive, it gets turned on its head and is now used to make weapons of war. And if you don't believe me, in something that is oddly similar to something that's happening right now with the coronavirus and ventilators, a lot of car manufacturers get retrofitted and turned into making planes and automobiles. Early planes had Rolls-Royce engines and Ford engines and Mercedes engines in the early plane, like the biplanes, like the engine in the front. The reason why that design was chosen was because it's a car engine in the front that you could just stick a propeller to, which is spinning the propeller instead of spinning the tires. It takes the very tools of the Industrial Revolution and spins them on its head to make weapons of war. Now, for today, other than Junger, which we're going to talk about, believe me, we have to talk about Erich Maria Remarque. Because for today, you had to read two first-hand interpretations of what fighting in World War I is actually like. You had to read Remarque and you had to read Junger. Now, I will read parts of Remarque before we talk about it. And this is, I guess, content warning. The following account that Remarque tells is rather graphic. So, you've been warned. We wake up in the middle of the night. The earth booms. Heavy fire is falling on us. We crouch into every corner. We distinguish shells of every caliber. Every man lays a hold of his things and looks again every minute to reassure himself that they're still there. The dugout heaves. They're being bombarded during this part of the book. The night roars and flashes. We look at each other in the momentary flashes of light, and with pale faces and pressed lips, we shake our heads. Every man is aware of the heavy shells tearing down the parapet, ruining up the embankment, and demolishing the upper layers of concrete. And when a shell lands in the trench, we note how the hollow, furious blast is like a blow from the paw of a raging beast of prey. Already by morning, a few of the recruits are green and vomiting. They are too inexperienced. The bombardment does not diminish, however. It's falling now in the rear. As far as one can see, spouts, fountains of mud and iron. A wide belt is being raked, but the attack does not come. The bombardment continues. We are gradually becoming numb. Hardly a man speaks because we cannot make ourselves understood. Imagine being in this little bunker. There's one of the few reinforced parts of the trench being bombarded and bombarded and bombarded by artillery and planes. Our trench is almost gone. In many places, it is only 18 inches high, and it is broken by holes and craters and mountains of earth. A shell lands square in front of our post, and at once it is dark. We've been buried, and we must dig ourselves out. Suddenly, the night howls and flashes terrifically. The dugout cracks in all its joints under a direct hit. Fortunately, only a light one the concrete blocks are able to withstand. It rings metallically. The walls reel in. Rifles and helmets and earth and mud and dust fly everywhere. Sulfur fumes pour in. If we had been in one of those light dugouts that they've been building lately instead of this deeper one, none of us would be alive right now. The effect is bad enough that the new recruit, starts to rave again, and then two others follow suit. One jumps up and rushes out, and we have trouble with the other two. I start after the one who escapes and wonder whether to shoot him in the leg, and then the knight shrieks again. I fling myself down, and when I stand up, the wall of the trench is plastered with smoking splinters, lumps of flesh, and bits of uniform. Suddenly, the near explosions cease. The shelling continues, but it has lifted and falls behind us. Our trench is free. We seize the hand grenades and pitch them out in front of the dugout and jump after them. The bombardment has stopped, and a heavy barrage now falls behind us. The attack has come. No one could believe that in this howling waste there could still be men. But the steel helmets now appear on all sides out of the trench, and 50 yards from us a machine gun is already in position and firing. The wire entanglements are torn to pieces, and yet they offer some obstacle. We see the stormtroops coming. Our artillery opens fire, machine guns rattle, rifles crack. We recognize the smooth, distorted faces, the helmets. They're French. They have already suffered heavily when they reach the entanglements, when they reach the remnants of the barbed wire entanglements. The whole line has gone down before our machine guns, and we have a lot of stoppages, and they come nearer. I see one of them, his face upturned, fall into a wire cradle. His body collapses. His hands, though, remain suspended, as though he were praying. And then his body drops clean away, and only his hands, with the stumps of his arms, now shot off, hang in the wire. You see, Remarque is one of these profoundly bitter veterans of World War I. And he comes home with the understanding of, number one, war is hell, that war is not glorious, that this modern incarnation of war is truly, truly terrible. And he comes away from it thinking, this should never happen again. I will write a book about my experiences so everyone know how awful the experience was of coming home. Of being there. And he writes All Quiet on the Western Front. And chances are, if you read a book in high school on World War I, this was it. It is one of two major books on World War I, and this is the other. This is one. The other is Storm of Steel. More on that in a minute. But one of the things that Remarque talks about a lot in that we haven't talked about in All Quiet is coming home. And soldiers are given leave. They're able to come home for a couple weeks and rest and recuperate before being sent back to the front. And Remarque describes the difference of home and the front like being on a different planet. Because the trenches are right on the border between France and Germany. The war, this is not World War II. If you're living in the heartland of Germany, the heartland of France, you might not even be aware that a war is happening. Because, you can't see it. You don't experience it. The war is happening at the front. So when you're coming home, to your parents, and your dad's proud of you, and your mom's asking, how is it, honey? How is the war? Are you having fun? Because bear in mind, your parents believe the same lies that you believed way back when. You're older now. You're wiser now. Well, what do? You tell mom the truth? You look your mom in the eye and say, I've been sent to hell. I watched, my friends get shot in the head right in front of me, and watched their corpse in front of me in no man's land and not been able to go get them and left them there in the sun? No, you lie. You tell your mom, surrounded by the fragments of your childhood, that everything is fine and that the war is doing great and not to worry about you. And you push it down. And you know, this is one of those books that you should really, it's not on the list. You have snippets of it. Please read it. It is one of those books that truly dissects the horror of war in a way that no book has really done since. But not everyone thinks like Remarque. As for today, you also have to read one Ernst Junger and Storm of Steel. And you may have guessed this already, but the tone of Storm of Steel is remarkably different than the tone in All Quiet on the Western Front. And this is partially because Junger draws a drastically different conclusion. Because if the core promise of World War I is that this is the new war, this is great, it will be wonderful, come to war, you will enjoy it. And then the war ends up being what it was. Remarque's understanding of that is we were lied to, and it turns him profoundly cynical. Junger decides, well, if war is great, and this is what the new war looks like, maybe I'm the problem. And I'm going to have to learn to adapt to this. And I'm going to have to learn to enjoy it. Junger is the anti-Remarque in many ways. Junger cannot be held back from going to war. Very famously in the book, he gets shot, and instead of saying, okay, I did my part, this has to beg to go back. He cannot, because the war shatters the lives of these kids, essentially, because they're kids, 16, 17, 18, they're kids, they're children. You cannot have a normal life again. And so the only thing that is normal, that resembles normalcy, is the front, is the trench. That said, Junger's reactions to things are weird. This should be like something you will notice while reading the book. That when you're reading the book, when you're reading Storm of Steel, and you read what Junger has to say and how he reacts to certain things, while you understand where he's coming from, there's also a really strong, this is not a normal way to react to this mentality. One of my favorite moments of Storm of Steel, one of my fully emblematic moments of Storm of Steel is towards the beginning, when Junger gets through his first conflict, his first big war. He's next to the front. There is this guy with a jam shop. And before you think, oh, jam, that's not that crazy. At the time, it was called preserves. And, what happened is you would put fruit in a jar and you would basically let it sit for ages, hence the name preserved. Now we can make jam industrially. At the time, we're talking about generations of work. And after the first bombardment, he pokes his head into this guy's jam shop and sees every single jar on the wall, on the floor, cracked open, and just this pile of preserved fruit everywhere. And the guy is cleaning it up, crying, because he's seeing his work, his father's work, some of them old enough to be his grandfather's work, just sitting there destroyed, ruined because of the battle that Junger just took part in. Now, a normal person might say, hey man, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Let me help you out. Or, here's some money, I hope everything will work out. Or something to comfort this guy. Junger laughs at him. Junger, reacts like every annoying, Paul brother that you could think of. Just like purely an amoral reaction to this guy's like pain and suffering. He just laughs at him while this guy's crying in his shop, and it gives you a sense of who this man is. It should not therefore surprise you, and that one of the reasons why you don't read Junger in high school is that Junger is a Nazi. Not in a like, oh no, he's so right wing. No. As in Junger helped found the National Socialist movement of Germany. He is a full on card carrying, Hitler's my guy Nazi. This is why you don't read it in high school. But now that I have told you that, the whole book makes a lot more sense, I hope, right? Like, there's a whole lot more to this book because a lot of his reactions to things make sense in the optics of this guy is a full-on Nazi. And I think the most terrifying thing about the book is that he's a relatable Nazi. Like, everything he says makes sense in his own mind. Like, it's internally consistent for why he's doing it. But it's also insane, right? It's also a completely divorced from reality understanding of what World War I is actually happening. What's going on around him. I think one of the most terrifying conversations I've had is, teaching at a county college. I get a lot of vets passing through my classes because they're coming home from tours and they're just getting back and they don't know what to do and they're trying to put their lives together, so they take classes at their local county college while they figure stuff out. And I've had vets in my class. I've been that fortunate. I've had a couple of vets, Iraq, Afghanistan, and quite a few of them have told me that they served with people just like Junger. The sort of people that laugh while firing from the top of their Humvees. Like, this type... Okay. Alright, I'm back up and running. Sorry about that. Yep. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yes. Perfect. Sorry, the whole thing crashed on me while I was talking. Yeah. I believe someone mentioned the vets they've told me they served with. Yes. So my vet story. The vets that have come through my class, most depressing conversation of my adult life, a couple of them, have been that these vets have served with guys that thought and behaved just like Junger. The sort of people that got on the back of Humvees and would fire guns and would laugh the whole time. Iraq and Afghanistan were the wars shown, and horrifying. It freaked me out hearing these stories because, again, to me it shows that this. Obviously, not every single person that thinks and acts like Junger is going to become a literal Nazi. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is the kind of person that might become a Nazi is perhaps more common than you realize, and perhaps more common than you think. Add to the list. We can't use it in the class, but add to the list. We're going to talk about it in a couple weeks as well. There is a German language movie called Die Welle, like Die, Welle. It's The Wave. Like, if you're into angsty German shows about the rise of Nazism in Germany again, it was actually shockingly pretty good. Give it a watch. I'm not sure where you might find it, but we'll figure something out. In any case, I think the point here is people like Junger are depressingly common. And because they're depressingly common, people like Junger can be found in all walks of life. And, something about war, something about World War One brought out the worst in them, if you will. Junger's reactions are just so weird to things, right? You might think that this person is not relatable at all, but when he explains his reasoning, you can understand where he's coming from, and that should scare you in a way. Now, I think the thing that we want to end on is how World War One. Well, no, we'll talk about how World War One ends in our next class, because we talk literally about how World War One ends in the Russian Revolution. I think perhaps on a more personal note, please stay safe. Please stay inside. I know that this was a scary lecture in the middle of a scary time. History is kind of being made right now. This is something that these events, maybe not the memes you're making around these events, but for sure these events, I mean, not Twitter.com, but these events will be in history books your grandkids will read about. Like we are literally living history. But of course, it turns out living history is horrifying and scary. And I remain, contrary to everything you might think or know about me, I remain confident and optimistic that things will get better. And I have no reason to think that. I have no way of guaranteeing that. But I think things will get better. But it will take effort on our part. It will mean making sacrifice. It will mean staying home. I've had emails from a couple of you saying, I don't have internet at home, so I have to go outside my local Starbucks to watch the lectures. Or my boss is forcing me to come into work. I'm really sorry that that's happening to you. I mean, I can't really express it in any other way. My only hope is that you are able to stay home as much as possible, stay safe, and don't go out, and wash your damn hands. That's the big one. Wash your hands. See these? Wash them. And I don't want to get any more emails about any of you guys leaving your house to go to X, Y, or Z places. The thing that drove me up a tree the most the past 2 days was the interviews with the kids down in Miami Beach. Don't be that person. Just don't. You probably know, because I mentioned this in class. Due to a family emergency, I was in Italy relatively recently. And I experienced the lockdown and was able to get out before it really, really, really locked down. I'm fine. I don't have it. It's been 2 weeks. I'm not dead yet, so I think I'm good. Yes, not dead. But I also saw where we are going. I also saw the United States today is Italy 2 weeks ago. And so remember when I came back and we did that first lecture and I said, guys, this is going to get really, really bad really, really quickly? This is exactly what I mean. It will get bad. I'm not going to beat around the bush on that. However, while it will get bad in the short term, I remain confident that it will get better in the long term. But in order for things to get better in the long term, we have to do our part. And part of that means, doing this. I'm not enthused to do this. I'm not thrilled to do this. But we have to. We have to for our grandparents, for our friends that are immunocompromised. I don't actually want the coronavirus to become the boomer remover. Um, I laughed rather hard at those memes. I will not deny that, but it's also not something I want. So please, please, please do it for your loved ones, and do it because I'm asking you to. Please. All right. Um, our next lecture will be Thursday, roughly same time, 6-ish. I will maybe end up live at some point tomorrow or Wednesday with like a better internet situation. I'm gonna try to prime myself like an extra long Ethernet cable and jack in from here all the way to my router and see if that works. Hopefully, anyway, and see if that makes anything better. But other than that, again, stay safe, and I'll see you guys